On the cold winter night of February 9, 2004, a remote stretch of road in Haverhill, New Hampshire, would become the stage for a mystery that has captivated and confounded investigators, friends, family, and countless armchair detectives for more than 2 decades. Route 112, known locally as the Spirit Trail, is a winding passage through the rugged foothills of the White Mountains. Its hairpin turns and snow-laden banks become treacherous with even a slight dusting of ice or fresh powder, and on this night, the conditions were far from forgiving. At roughly 7:27 p.m., under a steel-grey sky veiling the early evening, a black 1996 Saturn sedan lost control on a sharp bend near a snowbank. The vehicle spun out, coming to rest facing the wrong direction, locked tight and silent, its airbags deployed from the impact. Inside were signs of disruption: spilled red wine staining the driver's side door and ceiling, an empty beer bottle, and personal belongings scattered but undisturbed. Strikingly, critical items were missing: Maura's wallet, credit cards, and cell phone, yet everything else, from her AAA card to school books, remained inside. The gas tank was full, indicating a recent stop somewhere along her journey north. Above all, the car was locked, the doors secured as if Maura intended to return. But she did not. Witnesses who came upon the scene tell a peculiar and chilling story. Faith Westman, a neighbor living on the corner where the accident occurred, placed the first emergency call after spotting the car resting awkwardly against the bank. She initially reported seeing a man smoking inside, but later clarified that the glow of a red light from within the vehicle was likely from a cell phone or dashboard. Another local, Butch Atwood, a school bus driver, stopped to check on the driver. He found Maura standing beside the car, cold and visibly shaken but uninjured, refusing his offer to call for help. She insisted she had already contacted roadside assistance, despite the well-known fact that cell phone service in that area was virtually non-existent. What happened next unspooled like the opening lines of a thriller. Butch retired to his nearby home, within view of the crash, and placed his own 911 call 16 minutes later at 7:42 p.m. Yet another witness, known only as Witness A, later stepped forward with a stunning claim. She drove past the scene between 7:33 and 7:37 and saw a police SUV parked nose-to-nose with Maura's Saturn. This sighting contradicts official records which place the first police arrival at 7:46 p.m., arriving not in an SUV but in a sedan. The officer himself, years later, stated he was driving the SUV that night, adding layers of confusion that blur the timeline and sow suspicion. Within this bewildering gap of just 20 minutes, Maura Murray vanished completely, leaving behind a locked car and a snow-covered, silent road. The scene itself raised unsettling questions. The cracked driver's side windshield, spiderwebbed from the inside, suggested possible head trauma. The airbags lay deployed as testament to the collision's force. Then there was the rag, a piece from Maura's own roadside emergency kit, stuffed tightly into the Saturn's tailpipe, a baffling act suggesting sabotage. Could someone have tampered with the car, forcing her to stop and rendering her vulnerable? The official accident report stated the car had struck a tree, but a private reconstruction expert later contested that, finding the damage inconsistent with such an impact and believing the vehicle was still drivable after the crash. Adding to the complexity, signs of possible involvement by a second vehicle surfaced, a white scuff mark on the rear bumper and an unfamiliar Chrysler part discovered inside the Saturn, fueling the theory that the crash might not have been simply an accident. Within minutes of the accident, Maura Murray stepped away from her car, into the freezing night, and disappeared, vanishing like a ghost in the snow. Were those her last footsteps on foot, or had she been picked up by a passing driver? The pivotal clue came 2 days later when a New Hampshire Fish and Game K9 unit arrived with a tracking dog. Using the scent from a glove found inside the Saturn, the dog followed Maura's trail eastward along Route 112 for about 100 yards before the scent abruptly vanished. This sudden break-off strongly indicates she boarded another vehicle, rather than wandering deeper into the surrounding woods. It challenges early assumptions that she simply fled into the forest and never emerged, pointing instead toward the grim possibility of abduction or an unplanned, desperate departure with a stranger or acquaintance. The night on Route 112 marked the beginning of an enigmatic and haunting disappearance. A meticulously locked car, personal effects left behind, a trail that stops mid-road, Each detail paints a picture neither simple nor clear. The accounts of those who saw Maura moments before she faded into the shadows diverge and conflict, the timeline stretches thin, and the physical evidence teases a story incomplete, cloaked in unsettling uncertainty. A sudden vanishing from sight at a lonely, treacherous turn of the road set in motion a mystery that would grip a nation and challenge investigators for years to come. As we trace back those fleeting minutes on that winter road, it's clear that Maura Murray's disappearance is not merely a question of where she went, but why she left everything, her car, her belongings, even her carefully packed life, behind. The vanishing on Route 112 is the first step into a long labyrinth of possibilities that defy resolution. And as the snow continues to fall silently across that bend in the road, the question remains, what became of Maura Murray in those silent shadows? Maura Murray's life, on the surface, was a portrait of achievement and promise, but beneath it lay complex struggles that paint a far more intricate picture of the young woman who vanished so mysteriously. To understand the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, we must first look deeply into her background, the highs, the lows, and the pressures that converged in those final days. Born into a seemingly ordinary family, Maura was anything but ordinary in her ambitions and accomplishments. From a young age, she distinguished herself as a formidable athlete, a trait that earned her a nomination to the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point. This was no small feat, reflecting both her intelligence and her dedication. Yet, despite the honor and opportunity that West Point represented, Maura made the significant decision to transfer to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she pursued a degree in nursing, a career path grounded in compassion and care. Academically, she excelled, frequently recognized on the dean's list, a testament to her drive and commitment amid the demanding curriculum. However, her outward success masked a series of escalating personal challenges that increasingly strained her resolve. In the months leading up to February 2004, Maura was confronting legal trouble tied to a November 2003 charge for credit card fraud, an incident involving the improper use of a stolen card to order food deliveries. The charge loomed over her, scheduled to be dismissed only after a 3-month period of good behavior, one condition quietly jeopardized by the events that followed. Early February brought a wave of distress. On February 5th, while working a security shift at a UMass dormitory, Maura received a phone call that visibly shook her, leaving her in a catatonic state and uttering the words, "My sister," repeatedly. The source of this turmoil was a devastating family crisis. Her sister, Kathleen, who struggled with alcoholism, had relapsed shortly after being discharged from rehab. This relapse was not a minor setback for Maura. It resonated deeply, exposing a core of vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. Family accounts recall her emotional struggle through that weekend. One sister later suggested that her repeated late-night calls for food might point to a relapse of another personal battle, an eating disorder, signaling a loss of control that underscored her fragile state. As if this emotional turmoil weren't enough, Maura faced further stress when her father came to assist her with purchasing a more reliable car, a necessity for her nursing studies. Using her father's new Toyota Corolla to attend a party that weekend, she was involved in a serious accident in the early hours of February 8th, crashing into a guardrail and causing nearly $10,000 in damage. Though no sobriety tests were conducted, the incident visibly distressed her father, who later described her as distraught. Maura was a young woman caught between the weight of responsibility and what she perceived as irrevocable failure, and a future that suddenly seemed uncertain. Taken together, these factors formed a psychological pressure cooker: the legal jeopardy, the family crisis, the physical and emotional fallout from the crash. This was a young woman facing a convergence of crises that could have easily overwhelmed even the strongest of characters. On February 9th, Maura's final day before she vanished, the complexity of her state is evidenced in the contradictory choices she made. Although classes had been cancelled for a snowstorm, she took deliberate steps that day which reveal a conflicting intent, both to escape and to maintain ties to her life. She began her day researching directions using MapQuest, looking not to a singular location, but to 2 distinct places: the Berkshires in western Massachusetts and Burlington, Vermont. Later, she emailed her boyfriend expressing love but also a desire for solitude, encapsulating her emotional withdrawal and inner conflict. At 1:24 p.m. that afternoon, she crafted a false narrative to her professors and work supervisor, claiming a death in the family to justify an absence, a lie that was confirmed as such by her family. This deception was a calculated move to buy time, raising critical questions about her state of mind and intentions. Financial preparations underscored the seriousness of her plan. She withdrew nearly the entirety of her bank balance, $280, from an ATM in Hadley by mid-afternoon, a sizable sum for someone her age and circumstance. Shortly after, she purchased a significant quantity of alcohol, including various liquors and a box of wine, an inventory that reflects her state of mind as much as it does her intentions. Yet, amid these acts of apparent flight, she retrieved official accident report forms for the crash she had caused in her father's car. This act, laden with responsibility, contradicts any notion of her simply vanishing without a trace. Instead, it suggests a conflicted mindset. She was both preparing to leave and, in some way, planning to return or at least account for the consequences of her actions. Back at her dorm room, the scene appeared, at first glance, to reinforce the story of a pending disappearance. Boxes of her belongings were packed, art was removed from the walls, and an email to her boyfriend lay printed, hinting at relationship troubles. However, this picture becomes less clear when considering the family's insight. Maura had only moved into that room 12 days prior. Her sister posited that she simply had not finished unpacking yet, a reflection not of preparation for permanent departure but of typical student life in transition. All these details paint a portrait of a young woman caught in a storm, successful, determined, yet visibly burdened by emotional pain, legal jeopardy, and family turmoil. Maura was not merely a troubled student or a runaway. She was a multifaceted individual standing at the crossroads of hope and despair, making choices that reflect a deep psychological struggle rather than a straightforward narrative. This understanding shifts how we consider the events that would soon follow on Route 112. The background reveals Maura as neither a blank slate nor a one-dimensional figure making an impulsive escape. Instead, it shows a young woman under immense psychological pressure, driven by conflicting forces of responsibility, fear, love, and vulnerability. Her disappearance, therefore, must be seen in the context of this human complexity, a life in turmoil, a mind overburdened, and a singular moment when all these threads converge to create one enduring, haunting mystery. As we move forward to explore the precise hours and actions that led to Maura's disappearance, this layered portrait provides essential emotional context. It reminds us that beneath the facts, timelines, and theories lies a human being facing an impossible dilemma, and that understanding her story requires more than speculation. It calls for empathy, clarity, and a deep respect for the complexities that define a life in turmoil. In examining the final 72 hours before Maura Murray vanished, we uncover a complex portrait of distress, secrecy, and conflicting intentions, a young woman caught in a web of personal crisis and carefully concealed plans. The days leading up to February 9, 2004, reveal not a simple narrative of flight, but a multifaceted story marked by emotional turmoil and contradictory actions. It began on February 5, at her job as a night security monitor in a University of Massachusetts dormitory. During her shift, Maura received a phone call that would shatter her composure. Her supervisor found her in a near catatonic state, quietly muttering, "My sister," over and over. The cause was deeply personal. Her older sister Kathleen, battling alcoholism, had relapsed after being discharged from rehab. This news hit Maura hard, exposing her profound emotional sensitivity and connection to her family's struggles. Later, her sister Julie would interpret Maura's late-night calls for food as a sign of losing control, possibly linked to an old eating disorder. This episode was a seed of the emotional pressure mounting around her. The weight of distress intensified over the weekend. On Saturday, February 7th, her father, Fred, visited Amherst to help Maura shop for a reliable car, a practical step towards stabilizing her uncertain future. Later that night, Maura borrowed Fred's new Toyota Corolla to attend a dorm party. But in the early hours of Sunday, around 3:30 a.m., she lost control and crashed into a guardrail on Route 9. The damage was extensive, nearly $10,000 worth, and though police responded, no sobriety tests were performed. Fred described Maura as distraught, not just over the accident but over the disappointment she feared she had caused her father. Her sister Julie recalled that Maura was already her own worst critic, and this incident struck deeply at her sense of self. Compounding these events was a looming legal issue. In November 2003, Maura had been charged with improper use of a stolen credit card for ordering food deliveries. The charge was set to be dismissed after 3 months of good behavior, a period still active at the time of her disappearance. The car crash, potentially linked to alcohol consumption, risked derailing this deal and with it, her future nursing career. For someone who had once been a West Point cadet and a Dean's List student, the convergence of these stresses must have felt like a collapse. Yet, despite these pressures, Maura's actions in the final 24 hours were not those of someone simply running away. On February 9th, with classes cancelled due to a snowstorm, she moved with careful deliberation, setting a secret plan into motion. After midnight, she used her computer to search MapQuest for directions, first to the Berkshires in Massachusetts, then to Burlington, Vermont. These searches indicated a destination northward, but not a final destination fixed in stone. Her communications that day reveal a conflicted state. At 1 p.m., she emailed her boyfriend, Bill Rausch, saying she loved him but felt too withdrawn to talk much. Then, at 1:24 p.m., she sent emails to her professors and work supervisor falsely claiming a death in the family that would require her absence for a week. This clear deception was an attempt to buy time without raising suspicion. Shortly after, at 2:05 p.m., she called a lodge booking line in Stowe, Vermont, further evidence of planning a trip away. Financially, Maura prepared to leave. Between 3:15 and 3:40 p.m., she withdrew $280 from an ATM in Hadley, nearly her entire account balance. Alone and deliberate, she then visited a liquor store, spending about $40 on alcohol, Baileys, cola, vodka, and a box of Franzia wine. This stockpile would later be found in her car, hinting at an intention to drink during her journey. But there was also a striking act of responsibility amid these furtive preparations. Maura obtained accident report forms related to the crash she had earlier that week with her father's Toyota. Whether at the Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles or a police department, she acquired these forms herself. This act suggested a plan to address the accident properly, a sign that she intended to return or at least to deal with consequences, undermining the theory that she was simply vanishing for good. The state of her dorm room served as another ambiguous piece of the puzzle. Initial reports noted packed boxes and art removed from the walls, implying Maura was preparing to leave permanently. A printed email to her boyfriend, hinting at relationship trouble, was found atop these boxes, reinforcing the image of a severed life. But Maura's sister Julie has since clarified a vital context. Maura had only moved into that dorm room 12 days prior. It is plausible, even likely, that she had never fully unpacked, that the boxes did not signify a final departure but an incomplete transition. This reframing calls into question early assumptions, reminding us how thin the line can be between evidence and interpretation. The cumulative narrative of those 3 critical days presents a young woman overwhelmed yet meticulous, anxious yet thoughtful, simultaneously planning an escape and anchoring herself to accountability. She was searching directions northward but still gathering paperwork for an accident. She withdrew cash and purchased alcohol but also composed a fabricated excuse for absence. Her dorm room was packed, but potentially only partly unpacked. These contradictions speak to the human complexity behind the disappearance. They challenge the early simplistic theories that Maura was either fleeing and disappearing without a trace, or that she suffered a complete psychological collapse leading to immediate self-harm. Instead, they paint a picture of someone caught between worlds, wanting to vanish but also bound by duty, desperate for distance yet tethered to what she must face. As this portrait unfolds, it invites us to reconsider the nature of Maura's last steps before disappearing into the New Hampshire night. Her secret plans were not only about getting away, they also contained the seeds of a possible return, representing hope, fear, and conflict entwined in equal measure. This duality makes the mystery that much more poignant and tragic, for it was not just the unknown path north that beckoned, but the uncertain path that leads home. On the night of February 9, 2004, a seemingly straightforward car accident on a remote bend of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, quickly morphed into one of the most confounding mysteries in recent true crime history. A black 1996 Saturn sedan, carrying 21-year-old University of Massachusetts nursing student Maura Murray, had spun out, coming to rest locked and abandoned against a snowy embankment. But what the scene revealed beneath that cold, quiet exterior was a forensic puzzle full of contradictions, subtle clues, and perplexing oddities, each one deepening the shadows surrounding Maura's disappearance. The car itself was a study in mysterious details. The airbags on both front seats were fully deployed, indicating the impact had been significant enough to trigger them. Yet the vehicle was locked from the inside, suggesting Maura took the precaution to secure the car before stepping away. Through the driver's side windshield, a spiderweb crack radiated from the inside out, signaling a possible head injury, perhaps from a forceful impact against the glass itself. The interior was cluttered with some personal effects. A box of Franzia wine had ruptured and spilled its red contents, staining the driver's side door and even the ceiling liner above. An empty beer bottle lay discarded, speaking to her earlier purchase of alcohol that day, a detail that would later add layers of complexity to her state of mind. Equally striking was what was missing. Maura's wallet and cell phone, critical items for identity and communication, were nowhere to be found. Witness accounts suggest they were not left in the vehicle, underlining a deliberate action or an encounter that led to their disappearance. Her AAA roadside assistance card and school books remained inside, tangible reminders she hadn't packed for a long journey or permanent absence, but oddly left behind. Even more confounding was the discovery of a rag stuffed deep into the car's tailpipe. This is not a random accident but appears to be a deliberate act of sabotage, a calculated move to disable the vehicle and potentially force Maura into a vulnerable situation by ensuring the car would not start again. Conflicting narratives muddied the investigation from the outset. The official police report described the crash damage as consistent with striking a tree, yet a private vehicle reconstructionist commissioned by Maura's family suggested otherwise. According to this expert, the damage did not align with a collision against a stationary object. Rather, the car seemed to have sustained damage while moving under its own power. Adding to the intrigue were traces of a white scuff mark on the rear bumper and the presence of a Chrysler car part found within the Saturn, details fueling speculation about the involvement of a second vehicle, a critical piece still unexplained and not officially confirmed. These contradictions extended beyond the physical evidence to witness testimonies, which proved wildly divergent and a source of significant confusion. The timeline of events, compressed into roughly 20 minutes, became a chaotic swirl of contradictory reports. The first 911 call came from Faith Westman, a neighbor who saw the car aground on the snowy embankment. She initially reported seeing a man smoking a cigarette inside the vehicle, a claim that would later be rigorously disputed. Westman clarified, in fact, she had seen a red glowing light inside the car that she assumed was a cigarette but might have been the glow from a cell phone or dashboard light. This initial 911 call set a tone of uncertainty immediately. Soon after, Butch Atwood, a local school bus driver, encountered Maura by her crashed vehicle. He described her as appearing cold and shivering but physically unharmed, no visible injuries or blood. Atwood offered assistance, even proposing to call the police, but Maura declined, insisting she had already requested AAA roadside help. Yet, knowing the area's notoriously poor cell service, Atwood was skeptical of her claim, but respected her wishes to handle the situation independently. He then left the scene and placed his own 911 call at 7:42 p.m., 15 minutes after the initial report to emergency services. A witness known only as Witness A brought the story into sharp conflict with official records. She attested to driving past the crash site between 7:33 and 7:37 p.m., minutes before the officially recorded arrival of police. Crucially, she reported seeing a Haverhill police SUV parked nose-to-nose with Maura's Saturn. Her cell phone records corroborate her presence near the scene at this time, lending credibility to her account. This contradicts the official log, which states that Officer Cecil Smith arrived only at 7:46 p.m. and reportedly in a police sedan rather than an SUV. Officer Smith's later statement that he had been driving the SUV Saturn on that night seems intended to bridge this timeline gap, but only entangled the narrative further. Witness stories from other locals, including Atwood and Westman, described arriving police in a sedan #002. These discrepancies about what vehicles were on scene and when create a timeline riddled with uncertainties that have plagued the investigation ever since. Even more puzzling is what the locked car and abandoned road tell us, and what they seem to conceal. The airbags deployed, the windshield cracked from inside, yet no definitive evidence was found at the scene of a struggle or external attack. The scattered belongings and spilled wine suggest abrupt departure or disturbance. The missing wallet and cell phone hint at possible forced removal or planned concealment of identity and communications. Grappling with her vulnerability after the crash, Maura's situation was precarious, but why would she lock her car and step away without telling anyone? At the core of these questions is the ominous rag jammed into the tailpipe. This is not a common roadside occurrence. It speaks of sabotage. Whoever stuffed that rag intended to prevent the car from starting again, perhaps to trap the driver or passenger at the scene. Yet, this sabotaged vehicle was found locked and left behind. Whoever was responsible either fled or disappeared with Maura. This sinister detail has been a pillar supporting theories of foul play, marking the night as more than a simple accident or vanished student. Compounding these enigmas was the contradictory and fragmentary nature of the witness testimonies. The initial 911 call, later corrected, gave rise to rumors of a man smoking near the vehicle, feeding speculation of a mysterious figure involved. Nearby residents' accounts ranged from clear sightings of the police at the crash site well before officers officially logged their arrival, to outright denials of seeing any other individuals beyond Maura. These conflicting versions of reality have obscured vital minutes after the crash when Maura was still present and potentially vulnerable. This fractured timeline has profoundly impacted the investigation's trajectory, hindering any clear path to truth in those first critical moments. Logistical confusion compounded by diverging witness accounts muddled the foundation for all subsequent inquiry and left critical questions unanswered. Who was truly present? When did law enforcement arrive? Was there a second vehicle involved? And most pressing of all, what happened to Maura Murray in those fleeting, undeciphered minutes before she vanished? As if to answer the puzzle, 2 days after Maura disappeared, a new Hampshire Fish and Game Canine unit was brought in to track her trail. Using a scent from one of Maura's gloves found in the car, the dog followed her path approximately 100 yards east along Route 112, the direction Maura had been headed, before suddenly losing the scent on the road itself. This sudden end to the trail strongly suggests she entered another vehicle rather than venturing on foot into the woods or surrounding wilderness. This critical finding lends credence to foul play, or at least an orchestrated removal from the scene, but it also deepens the mystery. Where was that vehicle headed, and who was behind the wheel? From the locked car's puzzling scene, the grape-stained interior, the spiderwebbed windshield hinting at injury, to the missing essential belongings, the sabotaged tailpipe, and the widely conflicting official accounts alongside divergent eyewitness reports, each element weaves together a shadowy narrative that defies simple explanation. The night Maura Murray vanished is not merely a story of a car crash. It is a forensic enigma caught between official records and witness contradictions, a web of clues pointing both to tragic accident and sinister intent. In this tangled space between fact and uncertainty, Maura stepped out from the locked Saturn, and then she disappeared, leaving behind a forensic puzzle that continues to haunt every investigation, every theory, and every call for answers. What transpired on that dark, snowy curve of Route 112 may never be fully known, but the pieces left behind demand our careful scrutiny, respect for the missing, and relentless pursuit of the truth. As we move forward, understanding this intricate and chaotic night lays the groundwork for examining the crucial scent trail captured days later by the K9 unit and delving deeper into the investigative challenges that have shaped this heartbreakingly enduring mystery. 2 days after Maura Murray's disappearance, a crucial development came that would significantly shape the narrative of her vanishing, and perhaps narrow the possibilities of what truly happened on that cold night along Route 112. Law enforcement brought in a specially trained K9 unit from New Hampshire Fish and Game to try and pick up Maura's trail. The dog's task, to follow the scent of Maura, using one of her gloves found inside the locked Saturn at the crash site. What the canine uncovered provided a pivotal clue that would challenge some widely held assumptions about her fate. The dog followed Maura's scent east along the snowy stretch of Route 112 for approximately 100 yards. This was a critical piece of tracking, because it confirmed that Maura had indeed left the immediate crash site on foot. She did not remain standing frozen next to her vehicle beyond the initial moments witnessed. But then, something striking happened. After those 100 yards, the trail abruptly ended. The dog became confused, unable to continue tracking any further. It was not that the scent simply faded in the wilderness. It vanished suddenly and completely on the road itself. This pattern strongly suggests that Maura did not continue walking, nor did she wander off into the nearby forest. The dramatic halt in the scent trail is widely interpreted as evidence that Maura entered a vehicle there, getting inside a car rather than continuing solo on foot. This minor gap in the physical evidence carries enormous implications. It contradicts the theory that she simply fled into the New Hampshire woods, disoriented or panicked after the crash, only to perish in the snow. It casts doubt on assumptions that she wandered and got lost, leaving a trail of footprints and ultimately remains to be discovered by search parties. Instead, the canine evidence aligns with theories that Maura either voluntarily got into a car, perhaps with someone she knew, or was forcibly taken by a stranger. This possibility shifts the focus from misadventure to one that includes abduction or a planned departure by motor vehicle. The nature of the trail lends weight to the idea that the last moments of Maura's known whereabouts involved a vehicle other than her own, suggesting that another driver may have come into the picture at that isolated stretch of road where her car was found. For the Murray family, this scent trail was much more than a detail on a tracking report. It represents a thread of hope and a tangible indication that Maura might have been alive and interacting with someone after the crash. Her sister Julie has expressed that this evidence is one of the most persuasive and reassuring, as it points away from the grim prospect of Maura succumbing alone in the forest, and instead supports the possibility she was picked up or made a decision to leave with another party. This trail also raises questions about who might have driven the vehicle and why they have never come forward. From the law enforcement perspective, the canine's findings triggered a reassessment of investigative priorities. Initially, the police had hoped to find Maura wandering the woods, searching for her on foot or relying on the concept of an accidental misadventure. But the discontinuity in the scent trail indicated investigators needed to expand their scope to include the possibility of another vehicle involved, which at the time had not been confirmed. The dog's sudden loss of scent on the road was understood as an evidentiary pivot point that distinguished this case from a simple missing person scenario complicated by wilderness hazards. Despite its importance, however, the canine evidence was not enough in itself to resolve the case. No vehicle or driver has ever been conclusively linked to Maura's disappearance. Yet the scent trail remains a linchpin in the debate, a piece of concrete evidence that challenges assumptions on either side. It prevents the case from being neatly categorized as either a tragic accident lost to the elements or a straightforward runaway scenario. The abrupt end of the canine trail is perhaps symbolic of the case as a whole, a trace that leads to a sudden stop, leaving more questions than answers. In the cold and lonely expanse of Route 112, the scent vanished as Maura herself vanished, with no further footsteps, no witness accounts of a hitchhiker or passenger, and no evidence of how far or where she might have gone. As the investigation evolved, this piece of canine evidence became a focal point in shaping theories of Maura's fate. It bolstered the idea that something, or someone, was waiting beyond that snowy road. It suggested a moment of transition from vulnerability to a new, unknown chapter, whether voluntary or forced. For listeners retracing the steps of that night, the scent trail stands out as one of the rare, tangible markers that Maura's path did not end alone on the side of a desolate highway. Instead, it invites a chilling possibility that her story continued beyond what anyone else saw or heard. This realization pushes the case forward into the realms of abduction or secret departure and forever compels investigators, family, and the searching public to look beyond the snowbanks and underbrush for answers. As we move deeper into the investigations unfolding, the canine trail remains a critical clue, a whisper from those silent shadows on Route 112, urging us not to settle for easy answers but to keep probing the dark where Maura disappeared. The trail may have ended, but the search, and the questions it raises, are far from over. The investigation into Maura Murray's disappearance began under a shadow of assumption and uncertainty that shaped every aspect of the official response in the critical hours and days that followed. Initially, local law enforcement and state authorities approached the case through the lens of Maura as a voluntary runaway or, possibly, someone wrestling with suicidal thoughts. This presumption was largely informed by her known personal struggles, including the mounting legal and emotional difficulties she faced in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The prevailing narrative at the time framed Maura's actions not as a result of foul play or abduction, but as a distressed young woman choosing to vanish on her own terms. In the immediate aftermath of the crash and Maura's disappearance, this mindset contributed to hesitations and delays that would prove consequential. When the black Saturn was found at the snowbank on Route 112, with its airbags deployed and the car locked, authorities quickly surmised Maura had left voluntarily, perhaps to escape her troubles. The first Be on the Lookout alert was only issued the following day, and a full-scale search by the New Hampshire Fish and Game and other agencies did not begin until nearly 48 hours after the incident, after Maura's father arrived in Haverhill and applied considerable pressure on law enforcement to intensify the search. This lag in response typified the early investigative posture, where urgency and resources were not immediately mobilized to the degree one might expect in a potential abduction or missing person case. The family's frustration with this approach grew steadily. From their perspective, the initial framing by police undermined the gravity of the situation and allowed valuable time to slip away without comprehensive ground searches or follow-up on leads. Missed opportunities to interview local residents who had been near the crash scene, as well as a failure to investigate thoroughly in the direction where the K9 unit's tracking dog last picked up Maura's scent, cemented their belief that procedural protocol was broken. One glaring example was the discovery of a handwritten phone number for a condo owner in Bartlett, New Hampshire, found in Maura's car, an apparent lead that was never pursued by investigators until the family independently made contact years later. These and other lapses fed a deep erosion of trust between the Murray family and the authorities tasked with finding their daughter. The investigation did, however, evolve over time. Roughly 10 days after Maura's disappearance, the FBI was brought in to assist, signaling an escalation in the resources and expertise applied to the case. Advanced search techniques came into play, including the deployment of helicopters equipped with thermal imaging and the introduction of cadaver dogs to scour the surrounding wilderness. High-profile searches captured public attention, such as the 2017 and 2019 excavations of a private home near the crash site prompted by long-standing tips and cadaver dog alerts. Despite the significant investment of time, manpower, and technology, these searches consistently came up empty-handed. Ground-penetrating radar-assisted digs found no evidence that Maura's remains or any related clues were hidden beneath the soil. In 2022, another extensive search of the adjacent towns of Llandaff and Easton was carried out, revisiting previously searched areas with more thoroughness, yet produced no new evidence. Throughout these efforts, the official classification of Maura's disappearance shifted, moving away from the early runaway hypothesis toward treating the case as a suspicious cold case with an open and active investigation. This shift reflected new recognition that foul play could not be ruled out, even as no concrete proof of criminal activity had surfaced. The FBI's release of an age-progressed image of Maura on the 20th anniversary of her disappearance underscored the enduring nature of the mystery and the unresolved hope for new information to emerge. The Murrays remained the case's most relentless advocates. Fred Murray, Maura's father, emerged as a tireless figure campaigning for transparency, challenging police narratives, and demanding accountability. His frustration with the investigation's early shortcomings culminated in a legal battle using the Freedom of Information Act to access the full police case files, an effort to pierce the veil of official secrecy and exert pressure on the investigative agencies. This combative stance highlighted the deep fissure between law enforcement and the family, born of years of perceived neglect, mismanagement, and repeated unanswered questions. The family's critique of the police investigation has been pointed and specific. They cite a series of missed leads, failure to conduct timely and comprehensive interviews, and a reluctance to seriously follow the theory of abduction despite compelling evidence such as the abrupt ending of Maura's K9 scent trail along the road. These elements, combined with the framing of the case as a runaway scenario, resulted in a search effort that lacked the immediacy and scale warranted by a potential violent crime. The Murray family contends that this initial investigative approach cost precious time and may have compromised opportunities to recover Maura or secure vital evidence. In recent years, Maura's sister Julie has stepped into the public spotlight, transforming the family's advocacy into a strategic media campaign aimed at controlling the narrative and cutting through the noise of speculation. Her launch of the podcast Media Pressure in 2024 represents a pivotal evolution from reactive criticism to proactive storytelling. By harnessing the power of new media, Julie seeks not only to honor Maura's memory as a multifaceted individual, but also to generate public interest that can drive new leads and potentially renew the investigation. This effort is emblematic of the family's ongoing fight to maintain visibility and pressure on official channels more than 2 decades after Maura's vanishing. Thus, the investigation into Maura Murray's disappearance reveals a complex interplay of early assumptions, procedural setbacks, and gradual escalation in search efforts. From the initial presumption of voluntary flight to the involvement of federal agencies and advanced search technologies, the case's trajectory has been marked by moments of hope tempered by repeated disappointment. The family's critique underscores the profound impact of how a missing person case is framed from the outset, not only affecting the thoroughness and urgency of the response but also shaping the long-term relationship between loved ones and law enforcement. As the official investigation continues under the classification of a suspicious cold case, the search for answers remains as urgent and unresolved today as it was in those first bewildering hours on Route 112. The shadows that envelop Maura's disappearance persist, beckoning anyone with knowledge to come forward and finally illuminate the truth behind the silent shadows. Maura Murray's disappearance in 2004 is not just a haunting mystery of a young woman vanishing without a trace. It marks a pivotal moment in the evolution of crime investigation, a case that unfolded just days after the launch of Facebook, thrusting it into the new, uncharted territory of social media-driven public scrutiny and engagement. This was the dawn of what many would call the first major social media mystery, where a global community of online sleuths came together across time zones and continents to dissect every detail, theory, and clue, illustrating both the promise and perils of digital-age true crime. In the days and weeks following Maura's disappearance on that cold February night along Route 112, the internet became the primary space where questions, theories, and concerns about her fate proliferated. The case quickly gained traction on then new platforms, spreading through message boards, early Facebook groups, and chat rooms dedicated to missing persons and unsolved mysteries. This growing digital community brought unprecedented attention to Maura's story, attention that might otherwise have dissipated into the obscurity that swallows many local disappearances. The positive impact of this virtual engagement cannot be understated. It allowed for an awareness that crossed geographical boundaries, keeping Maura's name alive and compelling people from all walks of life to participate in a collective, ongoing search for answers. Even amidst the limitations and frustrations of the official investigation, social media kept pressure on law enforcement and preserved public interest far longer than might have been possible otherwise. It also facilitated innovative, family-led outreach efforts. Maura's family, particularly her sister Julie, embraced these new tools to share authentic insights, humanize Maura beyond the headlines, and rally a supportive audience dedicated to the truth rather than mere speculation. Through podcasts, TikTok videos, and dedicated websites, family members have created a narrative that focuses on Maura's life, her ambitions, struggles, and personality, instead of allowing her to be reduced to a cold, static case file. This effort to regain narrative control through new media projects is a vital act of remembrance and respect. It pushes back against the often tumultuous swirl of misinformation and sensationalism, shining a light on the human at the center of the mystery and the family who continues to endure the grief of ambiguity. However, the digital age also brought significant challenges. The vast online attention that sustained interest also opened the floodgates to misinformation, conspiracy theories, and harassment that have deeply affected Maura's family and the behavioral community. In the absence of concrete answers, the void was quickly filled with wild speculation, some entirely unfounded, weaving complicated and contradictory stories that have distracted from the facts. Social media's anonymity allowed some to cross ethical boundaries, subjecting the family and local residents to vitriol, baseless accusations, and unwanted intrusion. The emotional toll has been severe, forcing Maura's aunt to close beloved family message boards and prompting residents near the crash site to install no trespassing signs as a barrier against curious, sometimes hostile online followers, turning the area into a quasi-pilgrimage site. This duality, the power of social media as both a force for good and a source of pain, is emblematic of the modern true crime landscape. The Maura Murray case stands as a cautionary tale about the limits of armchair sleuthing and the potential harms of public obsession, highlighting the need for balance between collective engagement and respect for the individuals whose lives are entwined in these stories. Amidst this complexity, the Murray family's journey to protect Maura's humanity offers a profound lesson. By embracing digital media on their own terms, they strive not only to find answers but to preserve dignity and hope. Julie Murray's podcast and social media presence serve as conduits for nuanced conversation, emphasizing Maura's hopes, fears, and strength rather than reducing her to a mere puzzle to solve. In doing so, they reclaim the narrative from the chaos of online speculation and honor the person behind the headlines. The case of Maura Murray is a reflection of its time, the very beginning of an era where social media can mobilize community, amplify voices, and inspire action, but where it can also inflict harm through misinformation, obsession, and loss of privacy. This complicated legacy is inseparable from the ongoing mystery that clings to that snowy hairpin on Route 112, the place where a young woman disappeared, and the world began to watch differently. As the investigation continues, the digital shadows cast by social media remain a double-edged sword, but the family's resilient use of these platforms to focus on Maura's life rather than just her disappearance offers a hopeful path forward. It reminds us that behind every viral mystery is a person, a family, and a community seeking understanding and compassion in equal measure. And so, this chapter closes with a quiet but resolute invitation to look beyond the theories and headlines, to remember Maura Murray as a young woman who loved, struggled, and dreamed, forever alive in the hearts of those who refuse to let her story fade. Next, we will explore the tangled web of theories that have emerged over the years, examining foul play, voluntary disappearance, and misadventure, to better understand the conflicting possibilities that have kept Maura Murray's fate shrouded in uncertainty. In the tangled web of Maura Murray's disappearance, three dominant theories vie to explain the mystery, each painting a starkly different picture of her fate but none offering conclusive answers. These theories, foul play, voluntary disappearance, and misadventure, are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they weave together a narrative labyrinth born from the frustrating absence of definitive evidence. To understand the enduring puzzle, we must explore each theory in detail, weighing the clues and contradictions they present. First, the theory of foul play. This posits that Maura, vulnerable and stranded on a remote, treacherous stretch of Route 112, fell victim to a predator who seized the opportunity to harm or abduct her. The foundation of this theory rests heavily on the critical piece of evidence provided by the canine search conducted 2 days after Maura's disappearance. The tracking dog followed her scent for roughly 100 yards eastward along the highway, but then the trail abruptly ended. Such an abrupt stop in the scent trail is a strong indication, in canine tracking terms, that she did not continue on foot into the wilderness but instead entered a vehicle. Supporting this line of thought are the suspicious signs at the crash scene itself. Among them is the inexplicable detail of a rag found stuffed into the tailpipe of Maura's Saturn. This bizarre and deliberate act strongly suggests the car was sabotaged, possibly to force Maura to stop and become stranded. If true, this implies a level of premeditation and malicious intent from a person or persons unknown. Additionally, witness reports add eerie complexity. One contractor claimed to have seen someone matching Maura's description walking quickly several miles east of the crash site after the accident, although this sighting was only brought to police attention months later. Such sightings, coupled with rumors circulating in the community and a speculation around certain persons of interest, including a West Point acquaintance whose fingerprints were allegedly found in Maura's car, have deepened suspicions of foul play. Yet, despite these compelling fragments, the theory faces formidable obstacles. Police and investigators have consistently noted a stark absence of physical evidence indicating a violent struggle or assault at the scene. There are no traces of blood, no signs of a break-in, no forensic data supporting an attack. Statistically, the odds of a predator randomly passing by at the exact moment when Maura was vulnerable are slim. This leaves the foul play theory emotionally compelling but lacking the hard proof necessary to confirm what truly happened. Turning now to the second theory, voluntary disappearance. This narrative suggests Maura meticulously orchestrated her own vanishing, motivated by a desire to escape mounting pressures. In the days leading to February 9th, her life was clouded by legal troubles, academic stress, and profound personal upheaval, pressures that could drive a determined young woman to abandon her life and start anew. The evidence supporting this is tangible. Maura withdrew nearly her entire bank balance, packed her belongings, fabricated an excuse of a death in the family to professors and supervisors, and purchased alcohol, seemingly preparing for a prolonged absence. She even searched online for directions to destinations north of her university, hinting at a planned journey. Some have speculated she arranged for a tandem driver, someone who would pick her up after she left, the crash scene underscoring a potentially clandestine and well-thought-out escape plan. This theory interprets the abrupt roadside disappearance as a carefully executed bid for a fresh start, possibly across state or national lines. However, glaring contradictions undermine this theory's credibility. Profiler analyses from the FBI suggest Maura's personality and psychological profile do not align with someone likely to voluntarily disappear without any contact. Moreover, her actions that day were deeply conflicted. She retained her nursing textbooks and her birth control pills, and even bizarrely obtained accident report forms for the crash she caused earlier, signifying a plan to resolve issues and perhaps resume normal life. Most tellingly, no verifiable contact, financial activity, or sightings have been recorded in the 2 decades since. The complete radio silence makes the notion of a successful, sustained voluntary disappearance difficult to reconcile with reality. Living entirely off the grid for so long without leaving a trace is extraordinarily rare. The family's firm belief that Maura would never sever all ties further challenges this theory. The third prevailing hypothesis is misadventure. This paints a tragic picture of a young woman overwhelmed by panic and possibly injured, fleeing into the cold New Hampshire forest only to succumb to the elements. The crash and the condition of the car, deployed airbags, a spiderwebbed windshield possibly indicating a head injury, support the idea that Maura was disoriented and vulnerable. Her purchase of large quantities of alcohol on the day of her disappearance offers a further clue to a compromised mental state. Witness reports describe her as cold and shivering, and it is plausible she fled the scene to avoid police or the consequences of a DUI. The unforgiving winter temperatures and dense, rural wilderness could have made survival impossible, especially without adequate clothing, supplies, or shelter. This theory suggests that she wandered into the woods beneath the cover of night, lost and confused, and eventually perished, her body never found despite exhaustive searches. Yet this theory is met with stark contradictions. Despite over 20 years of intensive searching, including by professional search and rescue teams, canine units, and voluminous volunteer efforts through the forested areas near the crash site, no physical trace, no remains, no clothing, no evidence has ever surfaced. Furthermore, no footprints were found in the snow leading into the woods the night of the disappearance, which would be expected if she had fled on foot. Above all, the canine scent trail points away from the woodland and toward the road, suggesting she did not wander into the wilderness but instead entered some sort of vehicle. These facts sharply challenge the misadventure theory's central claim. The cruel irony of the Maura Murray case is that none of these explanations can be definitively confirmed or disproven. Each is supported by intriguing, even compelling evidence, yet each is undercut by equally powerful contradictions. The rustling shadows on Route 112 conceal a truth locked behind a frustrating evidence vacuum. This absence of clarity is what has made the case so enduringly compelling and so maddeningly elusive. Was Maura the victim of a predatory attack, one lost moment among many in the wilderness of human malevolence? Did she choose to vanish, leaving behind everything familiar to carve out a new existence, only to be swallowed silently by an unknown future? Or did a moment of panic and confusion lead her to wander into the cold, dark woods, leaving no trace but her memory? In truth, the story remains suspended in uncertainty, a void where facts give way to conjecture but no theory dominates. What we know for certain is that Maura Murray disappeared in a handful of minutes on a frigid winter night, leaving behind far more questions than answers. As the case moves forward in the cold, marked by intermittent new leads and ongoing family advocacy, these three theories continue to shape the conversation. No single path holds the key, but each forces us to confront the harsh realities of vulnerability, choice, and tragedy. The search for resolution is not merely about solving a mystery. It is about honoring the complexity of Maura Murray's life and the shadow it casts across all who seek the truth. With the evidence locked in this confounding balance, the story of Maura Murray remains a silent shadow on Route 112, a question mark etched deep into the winter snow, awaiting the day when the fog finally lifts. The disappearance of Maura Murray is more than a story of a young woman vanishing on a snowy New Hampshire road. It is a profound human tragedy that extends far beyond the cold facts and tangled theories. For over 2 decades, her family has carried an unimaginable burden, a relentless search shadowed by ambiguous loss, a grief without closure that shapes every day of their lives. Maura's mother, Laurie, endured this anguish until her death in 2009, never knowing what happened to her daughter. Her father, Fred, has devoted much of his life to seeking answers, tirelessly pushing investigators, and keeping Maura's name alive in the public consciousness. Their pain is echoed in the small community of Haverhill, where the disappearance turned a quiet town into a focal point of suspicion, speculation, and intrusion. But beneath the headlines and the mysteries lies Maura herself, a vibrant, multifaceted individual whose humanity must not be lost amid the speculation. She was not simply a missing person, or an enigma to be solved. She was a high achiever, a former West Point nominee, a dedicated nursing student, a sister deeply connected to her family's struggles, and a young woman facing immense pressures and turmoil. Her story challenges us to remember that every true crime case involves a real person with hopes, fears, and a life interrupted. Maura's narrative confronts us with difficult questions not only about what happened that night on Route 112 but also about how we handle such stories, with ethics, respect for privacy, and sensitivity to the families left behind. In the digital age, Maura's disappearance has become a landmark case, often described as the first major true crime mystery of social media. The internet's expansive reach ignited a worldwide community of online sleuths, relentlessly dissecting every detail, casting theories, and attempting to piece together the puzzle. While this global attention has been essential in keeping the case alive and pressuring authorities to act, it has also brought darker consequences: misinformation that blurs truth with rumor, conspiracy theories that the family must constantly dispel, and invasive harassment that has deepened their wounds. The digital spotlight is as much a burden as it is a beacon, an ethical conundrum about how far public engagement can and should go in cases marked by uncertainty and sorrow. As we reflect on the enduring mystery of Maura Murray, we must confront a stark reality: the case remains unresolved, suspended in time. No definitive answers have emerged to explain those fleeting minutes when Maura stepped away from her car and vanished into the cold night. The persistent belief within her family and community is that someone, somewhere, holds pieces of the truth but has not come forward. This enduring silence weighs heavily, a reminder of the limitations of investigative reach and human memory. Yet, there is a call that echoes through the years, for anyone with information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, to step forward and contact the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit. This ongoing plea is more than an investigative necessity. It is a testament to hope, the refusal to let Maura's story fade into obscurity, and a commitment to honor her life by seeking truth. Keeping her case alive in the public eye and investigative priority is a sacred duty, a tribute to Maura the person, beyond the mystery she became. In remembering Maura Murray, we confront the human cost that outlasts the headlines and theories, the lives irreparably shaped by loss, the community forever changed, and the empathetic resolve required to hold space for unanswered questions. Her disappearance on that dark February night is not just a puzzle to be solved. It is a solemn reminder of our shared responsibility to approach true crime stories with humanity, respect, and steadfast compassion. The shadow remains silent, but it is far from forgotten.